Konnichiwa.
It's history in the making, and we want you to be part of it.
That's a given.
Talking about people who are changing the game.
You guys have run a tight ship here. Oh my gosh.
The rock star sitting here.
I can't even describe it.
Talking about actual business.
Two beings at the top of their professions.
Started.
Lightning quick movements.
Changing
The rock star sitting here. It's just started.
That's right, folks. We are just getting started. Good morning. Welcome back to the Real Value Podcast, the podcast about real estate appraising, lending, selling, marketing, success, relationships, communication, and, well, how it all fits together. Good morning. My name is Blaine Feyen. I am your host for this and every episode of the Real Value Podcast. Hey, we have our email collection system all set up now. I talked about it in the last podcast, but we're all set over at realvaluecast.com and realvaluegroup.com to deliver the Real Value Podcast directly to your email box every week. Now, when you give us your name and your email address, of course, we appreciate that and protect it with our lives. We will never sell your information, and we will only deliver Real Value Podcast information to it. We also will deliver a little bonus content to it. So those of you who are listening on iTunes and Stitcher and wherever else you may have found us, we certainly, Libsyn is another source. We certainly appreciate you doing so, but you won't receive any of the bonus content that we record, and that includes extra time on interviews when we have some of those spit out, and extra bonus content that I have started to record that will only be delivered to the Real Value Tribe who sign up to have the information delivered to them. So head over to realvaluecast.com or realvaluegroup.com, find the podcast email information link and sign up there so that we can do that. Before we get into what I want to talk about today, I want to answer a couple. I also want to thank, all the new subscribers. We've had tons of them in the last couple weeks. I certainly appreciate that. Welcome everybody to the Real Value Cast, all the new subscribers, all of our existing subscribers and loyal subscribers from even several years ago. Appreciate you more than you know, and we welcome all the new ones. I get a lot of questions now from my new subscribers. One of the questions that has been popping up time and time again is about Appraiser Fest. Appraiser Fest is coming up November. All I know is November 3rd. I know it's that weekend, but that's my birthday, November 3rd. So I know that it's that weekend. I don't know the exact dates when Friday, Saturday, and Sunday fall, but in 2018, it is that weekend. And to be honest, I know nothing about it. I've seen it advertised over the years, but just go to, I think it's appraiserfest.com. You can find it, any of the appraiser websites that you may search and find information. I know they have a whole lineup of speakers and trainers and coaches and good information, probably people from Fannie Mae and all of that stuff. And anywhere appraisers are gathering to learn and be better, I salute you. But the question I keep getting asked from subscribers is, will I be there or will I be speaking there? And the answer is no and no. I have not been invited, nor have I been asked to speak. Maybe I will, but I don't think any of the people who organize it even know me or know me yet. I believe they will at some point, but they would have no reason to invite me. I would love to speak at those. I've spoken at similar events, not necessarily appraisal related, but I've spoken at big real estate related seminars and mortgage seminars, but nothing like an Appraiser Fest. But maybe someday. And no, I have no intention of traveling there for this one. If I was asked to speak, of course, I would be there and I would attend. But I have kids and family and several businesses I'm running. And I don't imagine I'll be attending this year unless, of course, I'm a speaker. But maybe next year. We'll see. So let's get right into it. I talk about this all the time. It's the name of one of my companies. It's what we do. The word is value. Of course, what we do could be considered a verb. We value real estate. It could also be a noun for those of you who are interested in language and grammar. We develop an opinion of value. That's how it's used as a noun. And while I don't expect anybody to know or care about the grammar differences between the verb and the noun usage of the word, I do expect to add some value to the process today by talking about how appraisers can add some value to the process. This comes up all the time, and I see it in every business, I see it in every industry, and I see it in every market. What process am I referring to? I'm talking about the process we all do on a daily basis. The process of real estate valuation, of developing an opinion of value on a piece of real estate, improved or not improved. Now, I started asking this question of myself years ago when I began speaking coaching in my local area, because I had learned to ask that question already in my other businesses. I learned from a master business and personal coach the importance of always asking this particular question. How can I add some value to the process or to my clients? And I always call them clients, by the way, not customers ever. And in asking this question, we're already starting down the path of value creation. It's part of Jay Abraham's strategy of preeminence. If you don't know Jay Abraham, just Google. Jay Abraham is one of the greatest marketing coaches out there. Not the best, one of the best. I've been following for 27 some odd years. But part of the process of becoming the go-to, the authority in your field, the source in your market, most highly respected and recognized leader in your field, or at least one of them, by your clients, on your knowledge, your ethics, your compassion, and your value, and the value you add to the marketplace while creating your product or delivering your service. That's what becoming the preeminent leader in your market is. Now, what does that mean for an appraiser, somebody appraising real estate in your market? That this can also pertain to real estate sales professional or mortgage professional. It really could pertain to anything. I don't care if you make skateboards, if you teach martial arts like I do, or create widgets. It's the same question. And it is very easy, by the way, in the profession of real estate appraisal to get complacent in our work and believing that the appraisal itself, the 17 to 70 page piece of data that we produce, is itself the value add. The problem with that thinking, of course, is that on its own, the appraisal process, and you as the appraiser are all commodities at some level. And we're going to talk about commoditization and what a commodity is. I know you all know the word when I say it. You may not know the definition or how it has happened and how it applies in the appraisal business, but understand that the appraisal to a large extent and the appraiser to a large extent is a commodity. Many of us as appraisers tend to think that the final appraisal report is our product, and that the process we go through invisibly, and I'm going to talk more about visible and invisible, we go through this process invisibly back at the office as the process. Excuse me. However, the appraisal to a large degree only has value in the loan process to the extent that it solves the borrower's or the lender's problem, the bank's problem, of securing a loan on a piece of property. It might be a refinance or whatever, but it's a part of their risk mitigation model of having a disinterested, unbiased third party go out and give an opinion of value on that piece of property. But the appraisal only has value in the loan process to the extent that it solves somebody in the chain, the value chain we're going to start calling it, and I hope you log that word in your brain because you're going to hear it from me a lot, to the extent that that we solve a problem in the value chain, or helping the borrower and lender come to some conclusion that a particular piece of property might be overpriced and that there's no market support for it. That could also be a value add. But again, helping all parties involved come to an educated conclusion about how to proceed. The lender, the lender's underwriter, the title company, the real estate agent, the borrower, the seller, they don't really give two shakes whether it's you or Andrea, the appraiser down the street, as long as somebody solves their problem. You might think they prefer you. We all like to think that. I have clients who would prefer me. I have clients, by the way, who owners of mortgage companies and real estate companies who call me to appraise their own personal properties or their family's properties. I take that as a huge thank you and endorsement of my quality and services. I'd like to think that they're doing that in all cases, but many of our clients really don't care if it's us or some other appraiser as long as it solves their problem. And I won't have time in this episode to get into all the different problems that each of them is trying to solve, because of course we know that quite often the problem each party in the process may want to solve is at cross purposes with each other. The underwriter wants something different than the salesperson and so on and so forth. But suffice it to say that there's always a problem to be solved, and we as the appraisers are solving a problem. But as I mentioned, let's talk about commoditization. Understand that there are always at least three forces, I believe four, but at least three forces trying to commoditize the appraisal and the appraisal process. Number one, the client. Number two, the borrower. And number three, the market. We could also say that the secondary buyer of appraisals, that's why I said I believe there's 4. The secondary buyer of appraisals is also trying to commoditize the process. I talked about that in the last episode. We know that Fannie, Freddie, Big Data, HUD, everybody's trying to commoditize the appraisal to some degree. We can safely lump them in with the market as a whole, though, for our discussion. We could take it one step further, of course, and say that our own industry is commoditizing the appraisal and the appraiser, too, which I'm going to address in a little bit. But if you don't understand yet what commoditization is, let me summarize. Again, I think all of you know when I say the word commodity, some of you might think pork bellies or sugar or precious metals or things. Those are all commodities. They can be traded on the open market. But a commodity is a good or a service bought and sold by the market that's typically considered to be a necessity or useful by the market, albeit sometimes considered a necessary evil. Commodities are typically distinguished only based on price, though. This is the key point about commodities. They're typically only distinguished based on price, since the market regards it as typically the only distinguishing characteristic. That's what makes it a commodity. When you're buying silver, for example, or pork bellies, or sugar, there might be some minute differences in quality and things, but you're basically looking for like kind, principle of substitution, what else could I get? And you're basing your decisions primarily on price. Now, a commodity is also widely available, and since there's very little difference between competing commodities, again, and as I say this, just replace the word commodity with appraisal or appraiser, and you'll understand what I'm getting at. Since there's very little difference between competing commodities, being a producer or a service provider of that particular commodity means what? It means a race to the bottom. As in, who can produce it cheaper, faster, make it more readily available, and still solve that problem. Think garden rakes and shoestrings. Are there differences in variety of these two products? For sure. I bought a rake at the beginning of summer, and I had a whole series of options for me at the Home Depot. There were a variety of plastic ones with some distinguishing characteristics in the handle. Was it ergonomically designed? And then there were metal ones, all with varying prices. You might be willing to spend $10 or $20 more for the metal one with the ergonomic handle over the plastic one, but the plastic one might do this, that. But either way, there's price variation to some degree. But you likely wouldn't pay more than the value you feel you'd receive from the variation over the basic rake. Right? We start with the basic rake and then we look at variations and go, well, will that add, and is it worth $6 more? Same thing with shoestrings. I particularly have some shoestrings that I buy when I buy a new pair of shoes that are stretchy and athletic, and they have a little locking toggle on them, a cinching and tightening thing to basically turn any pair of shoes into a pair of shoes that you don't have to tie. I hate tying shoes. So you simply set the tightness that you prefer on that particular pair of shoes with the shoestrings. You cinch up the laces, and then you lock them. And then you can slip into them anytime without bending over to tie them. It's not that I don't like to bend over. I work out all the time. I don't like tying shoes. I think it's a waste of time. So I pay a little extra for them over the regular shoestrings, but I'm paying primarily for their uniqueness and their utility and the problem that they solve for me over regular shoestrings. They solve a very specific and particular problem for me, and that's I don't like to tie shoes. So if I was shopping for regular shoestrings, however, which of course I have, dress shoes or whatever, my children's athletic shoes, I would expect to pay no more than, say, 50 cents to $1 between all brands, because they're all virtually the same. Shoestrings are a commodity. Widely available, not much variation beyond length. I buy hockey laces as well. There's a couple variations. There's waxed strings, which stay tied better when you're playing. There's non-waxed strings. And then there's several various lengths, whether you want to wrap the shoestring around your ankle on your skate or not. But they're all roughly $5. And I don't expect to pay much more for that unless they would tie themselves, which they're not going to do. So the process of commoditization is the process of turning something that may have been unique or readily available at one time into a product that is widely available, little variation, lots of producers and providers of the product or service, relatively indistinguishable from other products or services like it, with the main difference only being price. Now, what does that sound like to you? Does anybody recognize the appraisal process in that definition? Of course. To a very large extent, the appraisal and the appraisal process has already become commoditized. I recognized this when I first got in it back in 2000, 2001. Unfortunately, the appraiser, to a large extent, has also been commoditized by their own kind long before the market even had to do this. And this is, of course, what we're talking about today. Now, I know what some of you are saying. You're saying, Blaine, you idiot. I'm the best appraiser in my market, man. My clients love me. I do the best work around. I get paid the highest fees. I'm tier 1, etc., etc. To which I say, cool, man. You don't need any help. You're not the one I'm speaking to. You're not my demographic. You can turn off your ears, your brain, your keyboard, your monitor, your speakers. Go back to being the best in your market. You've got nothing left to learn. These kinds of people, too, are a commodity in that they are very common. They think they have it all sewn up until one day, boom, some big change, somebody better or worse, cheaper, somebody average, but cheaper comes along and they're gone. I talked about this in the last podcast, which we'll hit today, where we talk about Zillow entering the mortgage business. I talk about the tsunami, the big wave that's about to hit. Appraisers, much like realtors and lenders, they all eat their own kind to some degree. We have an appraiser in our town that drives around in a really nice pickup truck with a huge, I'll call it a sandwich board style painted plywood sign, a big tent board sign in the back of his truck. It's done professionally. And it says in huge letters, real estate appraisals, $150. It's very nicely done, looks professional. And I don't know, I know little about the guy, and I don't really care to. I'm sure he's a nice guy, cool neighbor to hang out with, and all that stuff. My guess is that he's also a part-time appraiser. And I have to imagine that he's not the best appraiser out there. He might be. I don't know. But my guess is that if he's trying to maximize his time and be profitable, he has to cut some corners somewhere in the process to do so. Otherwise, his dollars per hour at $150 would end up being $10 an hour, and he can probably go work in a factory for $20, which he might do. Nevertheless, the market doesn't know this when they see his sandwich board. And he's telling the market very loudly, I might add, that the range of prices for a real estate appraisal is somewhere around $150. Now, the market's not stupid. And I'm sure that the market of consumers has an idea that he may be the Walmart of appraisal services and would be willing, the market might be willing to pay a bit more to get something better. But of course, there's a whole segment of the market that's all they need. There's a whole segment of our clients that's all they need. There's banks that only need a $150 appraisal. But then again, if they don't know or care what better, and I'm using air quotes for those of you who aren't watching the video, if they don't know or care what better means, they may not know to search for something more expensive. Again, most of the users of our product and our service are looking for one thing: the opinion of value on page 2. I've seen realtors look for it. I've seen lenders look for it. I've seen underwriters look for it. I've seen homeowners look for it. I've seen attorneys look for it. And I've seen other appraisers look for it. They flip straight to page 2 and they look for that one key line, the opinion of value. Quick story on that topic, actually. I've talked before, I used to be a loan originator. I was in the lending business before becoming an appraiser. And when I was in the lending business, there was a company I'm sure many of you are familiar with called Countrywide Funding. They were one of the biggest around. And they had an office here in my town, as they probably did in most towns around the country. And as a loan originator, you could have your loan file reviewed on the quick with a special service they offered. And I forget what it was called at the time. I wish I could remember, but something akin to like a fast pass at an amusement park, Cedar Point or Six Flags or whatever these. You pay extra money and get a fast pass and you get right in the quick line. They had some service like this, and I can't remember if it cost money or not. It's irrelevant to the story. But you'd have a set appointment with the underwriter to review your loan package. And they would tell you right then and there what was missing and what would be needed to get that file to sail through underwriting. Because if you didn't use the fast pass, of course, it could take a week or 2 or 3, depending on how busy they were, to get your loan underwritten. So they had this fast pass system. And I sat through many of those appointments, and I can tell you that it was one of the most interesting things that I've ever seen in the loan process. And I don't know if they go on today. If underwriters are listening, maybe they can confirm or deny. But it was one of the most interesting things that I've seen. I saw a realtor do this when I was a real estate agent, new real estate agent. I saw a realtor do this same thing. He was the biggest agent in town, closing hundreds and hundreds of deals a year, and he was super fast at flying through the purchase agreement at the kitchen table and then hopping in his limo and leaving. But this is basically what occurred at this underwriter's office. The underwriter had this stack of files sitting to his or her left, the left of their desk. And no joke, it was literally 2 to 3 feet high. Like something you would see in an Office Space type movie. You were next in the appointment line. They'd grab your file off the top and they would begin thumbing through it with amazing speed. They had these little rubber things that they put over their thumbs so they could fly through paperwork. They didn't have to lick their fingers. And they always had a red pen. And they would begin marking things up and making notes on what was needed. It's like a super fast teacher going through your essay, circling stuff and making notes. They'd get to the appraisal and they would do the same exact process that I just described. They'd thumb through it real quickly, but they were basically trying to find page 2. So they'd go through your cover page and your page 1 and all the other stuff you might have in there. Quickly go to the opinion of value. They'd circle it and they would mark whether or not value supported or not. They'd look for a couple other things. They'd move on to the next thing in the loan package. And this whole process took anywhere from 3 to 10 minutes. Of course, it need not be said that Countrywide is no longer in existence. This fast pass process, of course, is just one of the contributing factors in their demise. There were many lenders doing this, by the way, that don't exist today. And I also know that the system has become much more automated for them, and much of that review work that these underwriters were doing at the time is now done by the automated underwriting systems like CU or Collateral Underwriter. Our appraisals, if they're for a federally related mortgage transaction, are submitted through Fannie Mae's UCDP portal, which collects all that information. That's why the new UAD forms, or they're not new now, but the UAD forms were created because they have all those cells now, and they changed the format for condition and quality to Q ratings and C ratings, and they're collecting all that data electronically in a portal to store it. This is part of the big data concern many of us all have. Since all of those global cells in the UAD form, for the non-appraisers listening, the UAD form is the appraisal form, one of the appraisal forms, or a format, I should say, that we use that has specific set cells in it that are uniform. All appraisers have to use the ratings, C ratings or Q ratings. They can't say fair, average, good, very good, excellent anymore. When talking about condition, they have to use C1 through C6. So all those global cells in the appraisal report are being stored and compared against other appraisals on that same address, and other appraisers, I should note. For those of you who haven't received a revision request that says your peers have also appraised this address and they say that it's C3, why did you say it's C4? Then you have to try to explain. But the automated process has helped the underwriters, of course, be more thorough in their review of the file because the collateral underwriter and the automated systems are catching a lot of stuff. The point of the story, of course, is how what we think we consider quality to be in an appraisal or in the process is likely completely overlooked, maybe not even considered as it makes its way through the loan process. So what I'd like to do today is I want to give some tactical and practical, as I like to say, some of the ways that we as appraisers can add value to the process beyond just being good at what we do. And of course, as I always say, quality is our highest order. I will never suggest to not produce a quality report. I've talked about quality reports in prior podcasts. I will talk about them again in future podcasts. Quality, of course, is subjective to some degree, but quality, of course, is our highest order, always. But what we're talking about today, I'm hoping will help appraisers start to see things differently. In the podcast about Zillow, if you've listened to that one, if you haven't, please listen to it, where I quote the head of a big mortgage company who said that there's a hole in the loan process, HOLE. There's a hole in the loan process, and that's that the average loan appraiser is 175 years old and they're not making any new ones. Those are his exact words. So if that's what they think about us, it means we're not doing our job. And by our job, I mean not just producing a report that has an opinion of value, because that's a commodity. And the process, to a large degree, the invisible process, is also a commodity. So I'm hoping to add some value in this episode by talking tactical and practical and giving you stuff you can take away and start implementing in your own business, at least start thinking about. These are things that we do in our business, things that I teach, things that I strongly recommend, things we're creating courses on. And I hope that the new economy, the new wave of appraisers that are going to start to hit the market will start to think this way. So let's talk about some of the way that we as appraisers can add value to the process beyond just being good. This is, of course, is not a complete or comprehensive list, by the way. And I would hope that some of you would begin commenting on the post or the podcast, again, over at realvaluecast.com. Expand on this. We're starting to get more input from our listeners and our subscribers. The input that we get from you, the questions, the feedback, helps us, of course, helps me formulate new content and new topics to talk about. But this episode is meant more to just start the discussion and raise the question, also raise awareness that we ask in our own mastermind groups and our own business planning meetings. How can we add value to the process, the product, and the service? Now, the first thought I have on this topic is that being good is subjective. I've already mentioned that. It's viewed differently by different parties to the transaction. And I say that because what I often hear from appraisers is how good their reports are. I've said it myself. How solid, how credible they are, how well supported their adjustments in their work are, and all that stuff, which is great. It's awesome stuff in our community, and it's often the only thing ever talked about. It keeps us in good stead with underwriters and review boards, and it's important. It has to be there. Again, quality being the highest order. However, I would ask you to consider a couple things. One, could be a controversial question. Could being the best appraiser in your market actually be a bad thing? Now, let me unpack the question a bit with some of my own experiences in our market, my market. Because we're one of the only appraisers in our market, and I know this from doing reviews, and I also know it from revision requests, who puts interior comp photos in our reports. So in addition to putting graphs and market and adjustment charts and data to support our conclusions and our rationale and a bunch of stuff that I know none of my loan officers care one bit about, we put at least 4 interior pics of every comp into every report. These are from the MLS, and we state that in the report. We put a kitchen, a family room, a bedroom, and a bath picture from the MLS for each comp to back up our assessment of the condition and the quality and the consequent adjustments for condition, quality, features, amenities, and all the stuff we adjust for on comparable sales. And while I think it's awesome and has helped answer some questions over the years, I can tell you that we've gotten a fair amount of pushback from loan officers, appraisal managers, and underwriters. We've had them tell us in some cases flat out, we don't need them, we don't want them, take them out of the report. Even though we feel they substantiate our conclusions and our rationale for adjusting those things, they go, get rid of them. I remember back when I started, we only needed 3 photos, front, street, and rear. Many of you appraisers that have been in it more than 10 years know that. Front, street, and rear photos of the subject. That's all we needed. All they needed. I never understood that. My company taught us right from the beginning, always put some interior photographs of the subject in there. And of course, that became the norm. We've always seen adding comp photos as support for our conclusions. Their inclusion in our reports has actually pissed off more people, however, more than a few people, I should say. I won't go as far as to say more people than not. But it's either because they didn't want that much evidence in the report of the comps, or because it was something extra that somebody had to review. So we think we're being awesome. Somebody else, a user and a reader of our reports, is rolling their eyes in an office and maybe limiting or even not sending business to us because we're too good at supporting our conclusions. Now, I know some of you will say, yeah, good, you don't need those clients. But I'm not going to go there yet. I don't agree that those are necessarily the clients to get rid of. And I'll never advocate for less than great work. But we should always be asking 2 questions about our work. What does my client think is good appraisal work? And how can I make the invisible visible to my clients? This is directly from Jay Abraham again. Again, to give credit where credit is due, I heard this concept from him many, many years ago. And one of the many brilliant things that Jay Abraham's been teaching for many years is the concept of making the invisible visible, which simply means stop keeping your processes and your practices a secret. You know what you do that makes you good by your standards, but likely nobody else does. And an important step in doing that is to write out all of the important processes. I'm getting right to the tactical and practical, so if you have your pen and paper ready, start writing notes now. Because one important step in doing this whole process is to actually sit down and write out all of your important processes, the steps you take to make your appraisals the best. And then answer the question, what's in it for me? Meaning, what's in it for them? That's what your client would be asking. Yeah, so you do this, you use a tablet, but what does that do for me? That's what everybody's asking. How does that help me? Oh, it helps you be faster and use the cloud and all that. Great. What does that do for me? And if we can't answer that question, we're not adding value. We're adding value to our business. I talked about that in the Going Mobile podcast. We're optimizing, we're becoming more efficient, we're becoming faster, we're becoming better. No double entry, triple entry, quadruple entry. But we also need to be able to make the invisible visible for our clients, meaning be able to express to them, articulate to them in an educated way, in an intelligent way, how this particular process that I'm going to will add value to your business as well. So we have to always put ourselves in their shoes and ask that question, what's in it for me? It's always the question that the client is asking when they're making buying decisions. You do it yourself. And it's the question they were asking when they decided to take a chance on first using your appraisal business. What's in this relationship for me if I decide to use you as my appraiser? How many times I've gone through that, I've lost count. Because you're always trying to sell yourself to lenders, real estate agents who already probably have a stable of appraisers. And so they're saying, well, if I start using you, I'll probably have to stop using one of these other appraisers or use them less. And why would I want to do that? So the way that we make the invisible visible, and the way I recommend you do it, is by taking a sheet of paper. I use my iPad and paper. I have legal pads. You guys can see it on the camera, but I have legal pads all over the place. Prodigious note taker. Excuse me. And I take a sheet of paper and I put a line down the middle from top to bottom. Vertical line. And on the left, you can put another horizontal line at the top. And on the left is the process or the procedure that you do. Don't qualify it yet. I was going to say, put on the left the process or the procedure that you do that you think makes you a good appraiser, but don't qualify it that way yet. Actually, I would say just go through and write down everything you do, every step of an appraisal. And then on the right-hand side, this is the exercise. This is to wake up your left and your right brain. You write out all the ways that your processes, every step in that process might benefit your client. We do lots of things on our appraisal that we know are good things to be doing. We do lots of things on our appraisals that we know we must do to be in compliance. We also do things in our businesses and in the development of the appraisal report that we may think is totally kick-ass that means absolutely nothing to our clients, either because they don't know about it or it just simply they don't understand how it adds value. We look at our appraisals as works of art and science, right? We hear that all the time. Oh, appraisal is part art, part science. And our clients generally look at appraisals as big, thick wastes of paper with lots of words and some pictures and one key line. Not key lime like the pie, key line, L-I-N-E. And that's the line that has the opinion of value, your opinion of value on it. So your job in this exercise is to break down some of the key components of the appraisal and the appraisal process and turn those things into benefits for the client. Now, if you have never been in a sales type business, and I know many appraisers got into the appraisal business because they're not salespeople, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Those 175-year-old appraisers that they're not making any more of are stereotypically, again, I don't want to offend anybody, but they are stereotyped, and for good reason, as like the old township assessor that is also the appraiser in the town. They're engineers, they're accountants. That's the way they like to think. They're not completely personality-less, but they typically don't like to interact with other human beings. Nothing wrong. I'm not judging that. They just are. My brother is that way. Great personality, but he's an accountant. He prefers to deal with numbers. So on the left side, you write out all the processes. Don't leave anything out. Something you might think is insignificant, checking a box on an appraisal form, write it down because this is an exercise to wake up the creative side of your brain. So let's walk through a couple of examples of some of the things we typically think make us good appraisers. And I'll try to explain what should be on the left, what should be on the right. So, for example, being good to us might mean what? Quick turnaround time, right? It's one of the things we've sold. I remember when I was first bringing catering lunches into banks to talking to processors and selling my services. This is back when you could do that. One of the things we sold sold them on was the 24-hour turnaround. Almost never had to use it, but it was a great selling point. It got me a lot of business. Because when they would order, I would say, do you really need it in 24 hours? And they'd go, no, but if you could get it back in a couple days, and I would go, perfect. I got the order because of the 24-hour turnaround, but I didn't really have to turn it around in 24 hours. Perfect. Every now and then we did. So quick turnaround. Accurate reporting of market conditions. Does your lender care? Not really. In fact, sometimes they'd prefer you not accurately describe or report market conditions, but that's another point. Using great comp selection, right? That's somewhat subjective, but it's what we think make us good. It's one of the things I sell. Well, my view of the market, my past experience as a realtor and a lender, my understanding of all the thousands of different sub-markets in our city. There's not one big market. There's many, many markets. So using great comps, good communication. Oh, I sell that one hard in my market. Good communication. You'll hear from me. We can't have substantive conversation or communication about the opinion of value, but we can communicate on a variety of other things. And trust me, I do. We do. And I teach all of my apprentices communication. Writing good narrative. Being able to explain your rationale. Being able to explain your market data. Being able to explain how and why you adjusted a certain way and where you got that information from, what method you used. How about not being misleading, right? We think that makes us good. Well, it's kind of silly. It's like saying selling a car because it's got a steering wheel. Yeah, I kind of expect that. I expect that you're not going to be misleading. But that's the language that USPAP uses, right? So we go, well, my reports are not misleading. Silly. Good adjustments. We think that makes us good. Filling the report with charts, market data, absorption rates, regression data, all the Fannie and Freddie requirements met, right? Those are things that we think make us good. And by the way, many of those things are expected. It's like when you walk through a house and the homeowner says, well, we just had the roof replaced. Okay, we write that down. We need to know roof, windows, mechanicals, things like that. But if they said when we bought the house, the roof was leaking like a sieve and we paid $15,000 to have the roof replaced, they think when they're telling you that's adding $15,000 to the value. And you're thinking to yourself, yeah, every house needs a roof. So things that they think are good and add value, it's good that it's a newer roof. It means it's got a long time, it'll last, but some things are expected. Your report not being misleading and filling the report with market data and meeting all of Fannie and Freddie requirements and being USPAP compliant, those are expectations. But those are some examples of things that I hear commonly from appraisers. Why, when I say what makes you good? Now, being a good appraiser to a real estate agent may simply mean hitting value. Now, I speak to real estate agents every single week. I think I'm one of the authorities in this area on that topic. I put myself out there in speaking gigs, and I always offer myself up as a resource, a free resource, meaning I tell them, you got questions on stuff, call me. And I get calls literally almost every day. In fact, I'm thinking of doing a podcast where I just record or post some of the voicemails that I get almost on a daily basis from realtors calling, just saying, hey, Blaine, can you help me with this? I'm having trouble. And I see that as a huge win for me. It takes time, yes, but it puts me out front and I'm educating the market. But being good to a real estate agent in a transaction probably simply means hitting value. Now, I know there are some good buyer's agents out there that if you can't support value and you come in maybe low or under a sale price, there are many good buyer's agents that will go, Yahoo, good, I've just saved my buyer some money if we can renegotiate this thing, get the seller to come down. And isn't that why we pay for an appraisal? I mean, if an appraisal averages $400 to $500 in any market and you save a buyer $10,000, well, isn't that a good return? I'd say so. By the way, that's a selling point you should be using in your marketing. Being good to a lender may also just mean hitting value. We know lots of lenders that they flip right to page 2 and they look for that line. What's the opinion of value? Did it hit? Is it supporting? And of course, fast turn times. I talked in my last podcast about the 8-day close that's in the pipeline. Lenders looking to close a loan in 8 days. We have lenders, if you're on Facebook and you're friends with a lot of your clients, as I am on Facebook, both realtor and lending clients, a lot of them are posting lately about how they were able to turn a whole deal around in, say, 15 or 20 days. So there is an emphasis on turn times and cutting down that process. Being good to an underwriter, different part of the value chain, usually means providing enough solid data to adequately satisfy their risk mitigation models. It's why there are revision requests. It's why there are calls. By the way, as an aside, I recommend knowing who all of the underwriters are in your client list, being on a first name basis and having conversations with them. I've had many, many conversations, good human conversations with underwriters. And although they can't tell you what to do, a lot of them will defer and say, hey, listen, Blaine, I can't tell you what to do in this particular case. But they will say, here's what I'm seeing other appraisers doing, or here's what I recommend, the angle you take, or here's how I would like to see it explained or backed up or supported. And when you do that, I know for sure that somewhere down the line when they're having meetings, the underwriters are going, I really like that guy. I had a good conversation. He gets it. He understands. Doesn't think he's perfect or the best. He asks good questions, and I like his reports or her reports. So those are the 4 or 5 the disparities in the market as far as who thinks what is what. Who thinks you have one idea of what you think is good. The realtor thinks this is good. The lender thinks a good appraisal is this, or a good appraiser is this. We know, of course, many lenders think a good appraiser is one who will bend to their will. I came up in the industry during that time when the lender had all the power. They would order appraisals with an estimated value on it, and if you didn't hit that estimated value, they would tell you right away, you either hit it or I'm finding an appraiser who will, and you won't get paid. Thank God those days are over for the most part. But there's two problems with many of the things we tend to value in our own reports. And the first one is that, again, I said it before, many of those things are expected. You expect a roof on your house, and you expect that roof won't leak. The second, and maybe key to this whole thing, is that many of those things that I mentioned are unknown to our clients. They're invisible. The first one, many of those things are expected. The second one, they're invisible. How many times have you turned an appraisal around in a day or two? Now, I know some of you do that on the regular. We kind of do as well here. Did everything you were supposed to, but maybe the market support wasn't there to say support a sale price, only to have the lender and the realtors pissed off at you. I know this happens all the time. I see it. But this is what happens when what is expected by the clients meets up with the invisible. This is, by the way, one of the reasons I advocate that appraisers make speaking and teaching one of their main marketing activities. It's been the foundation of much of our marketing effort for many years now, and it allows me to train my clients and my potential clients on how we like to work as a company, how I like to work as the chief appraiser, what our processes are, what goes into an appraisal, and it gives me the opportunity to make the invisible visible. You're going to hear this over and over and over in my teaching. Are you making the invisible visible? And I can tell you from speaking to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different speaking engagements, thousands and thousands of realtors and lender clients over the almost 20-year period, that many of them had no idea the Fannie Mae requirements, percentages, silly things that sometimes we don't like to express. But making those things visible quite often builds a bridge between you and your clients or potential clients, because now they understand. If you have to explain bracketing to a room of 75 realtors and they go, what? I had no idea that Fannie Mae requires you to bracket. And what does bracket mean? Oh, well, here's what it means. Oh, I had no idea. I thought you could just use the 3 highest sales in the neighborhood, and no, we actually have requirements. So being able to explain this, being able to articulate it in a language, I should say, that they speak, which is key, and I'll talk about that in another podcast, helps make the invisible visible. It's why I advocate that you make speaking and teaching and community outreach. We're going to talk about that as one of the tactical, practical things to do. It's why I advocate making that a part of your business. And if you're not doing it now, step outside of your comfort zone and do it. I get lots of input and feedback back on Facebook, as well as the subscribers who ask me about when I start talking about teaching and training to realtors and lenders. They say, I have fear of public speaking and all these other things. I totally get it. Right? It's the number one fear. The second fear most people have is going to the dentist. No joke. First fear, public speaking. And by the way, I'll talk about this in another podcast. It's just an interesting point. All fears that we have are somehow related to our death. And by that, I mean a fear of public speaking at some level within you means you fear dying. Not that you're going to go up there and have a heart attack, although I know many of you feel that way when you think about public speaking. But it means that many of you will get up there, you will embarrass yourself, you will stutter, you will stammer, you'll forget your lines or whatever, and then you will be shunned by the community, which is the tribal fear. You'll be shunned by the tribe. You'll be embarrassed. You'll go out into the world, and because you've been shunned by the tribe, you will lose your job, you'll lose your income, you'll end up on the street, you'll starve, and then you will die. This is the monkey brain or the tribal brain within us. That's what that's what fear of public speaking ultimately means. The reality is, if you were to write all that stuff out, you may stutter and stammer. You may not be great at it. You may forget your lines, but fortunately you're a human in a room of other humans. And humans, although they can be cruel, they can also be very forgiving. And if you're in a group that is most likely forgiving because they've been there and they also share the fear of public speaking, they'll forgive you. And if you're honest about it and say, I'm so nervous, I thank you for having me, but I don't like public speaking, they'll forgive you and they'll help you along. I've seen groups cheer on the speaker when they forget their lines. But it's one of the reasons I advocate doing it. Start with 2 or 3 person office. Just go in and sit down on a chair and have a chat around a table with them. Then build up to 5 to 10 person office, then build up to offering yourself out to lunch and learn groups where there might be 30, 40, or 100 people, or a whole organization, where there might be 3 or 4 or 500. You don't have to do that. You could always stick with 3 to 5 person offices. I'm just advocating doing it. It's been the foundation of our marketing efforts, and it's paid off in spades because we get to make the invisible visible. But so that I'm adding value to the process for you today, I want to go through a few examples of what I'm talking about. So with my piece of paper, my legal pad or my iPad in front of me, I've made this line down the center, made a line across the top. On the left-hand side, I've put processes and procedures. And on the right, I put basically what's in it for me. It's called a feature benefit list, by the way, for those of you who have never been in sales. It's just a feature benefit list. When I was training mechanical contractors, some odd years ago, I developed a sales training course, a huge sales training course, still probably the most fully developed sales training course for mechanical contractors in existence today. One of those things, one of the biggest takeaways, we did 3-day boot camps, and one of the biggest takeaways for them was taking features of, say, a furnace or an air conditioning system, mechanical system, and turning it into benefits for the homeowner. Because mechanical contractors love to talk like engineers. This switch and this blower and this and this and this. And homeowners are going, great. I don't give a shit about that stuff. But if they can take all those things and turn it into how it means comfort in their home or even heating, lower fuel costs, safety for their children, and those kind of things, that's a feature benefit. And then homeowners go, oh, okay. I don't care about the technology until I realize what it does for me. And we have to do the same thing in our business. Features, benefits. So let's take, for example, quick turnaround time. And let's define it and say quick turnaround is 2 to 3 days average. Well, that's on the left-hand side. We say we're good, quick turnaround. On the right-hand side, what's in it for me? Well, most appraisers are advertising 1 to 3 weeks. I know appraisers who are saying, I'm so busy, it's taken me a month. That likely means bad systems within your business, need some optimization, but okay, they're out a month. Perfect for me. My average turn time is 2 to 3 days. Most appraisers take 1 to 3 weeks. That's on the right-hand side. Go back to the left-hand side, quick turn time. We're just going to keep saying quick turn time. Right-hand side, no headaches for your processors. With all the other things they're managing title, they're managing income verifications, rent verifications, condo questionnaires. The processors have a whole ton of stuff to pull into the loan file before they can close that loan file. And the appraisal is one of those things. So you can sell that as a benefit. Well, quick turnaround means your processors don't have to keep bugging me. Hey, we're waiting on the appraisal. We're waiting on the appraisal. Quick turnaround time. Benefit? It leaves a cushion for revisions or additions that may sometimes come up. many appraisals, many underwriters, they're asking for additional comps, they're asking for revisions, they're asking for clarification. Understand that every time they do that, it slows the process down by almost a day, sometimes more than a day. Because every time they submit for a revision request, they give you usually 24 hours. Some of them say, we expect this revision back in 24 to 48 hours. And that's because they have other things going on in the process, like title verifications and rent verifications, income verifications, all that stuff. But what if you're the last thing they're waiting on? And then they have a revision request, so it slows things down by another day or two. Well, you can sell quick turn time on the fact that it leaves a cushion for those revisions, and my revisions will be done long before your rent verifications and income verifications and title and all the other stuff come back, so you never have to worry about me. So what does that ultimately mean to your client? You're going to close on time. That is feature benefit. The feature is quick turn time. The benefit is you're going to close on time. You're not going to have a hassle. I used to sell to my clients on that topic that I carry around a laptop. I carry around, I don't have it here, my Surface Pro tablet in my car. I used to use it as my main computer in my mobile desktop, and I would use a docking station so I could project to 3 monitors. I ran my whole business off of a Surface Pro tablet for about a year as a test, an experiment of working virtually. Now I carry it just as a backup in my car, and I do that to sell to my clients that, hey, I might be out on the road and you might need a revision. I have access to all my files. I carry this with me. I can make revisions on the fly. You don't have to wait. And they love it. How often do I have to do it? Almost never. But it's a selling point. All right, let's go on to another one. Expert comp selection. You're the expert in the field. You pick the best comps. Great. It's nebulous. What does that mean to your client? That's the feature that you're selling. What's the benefit? Well, you could sell them on your scientific process for choosing the best comparable sales. Point out the process by which the parameters by which you select and look for. This is one of the points that I give in my talks called How to Think Like an Appraiser. And they love it because the realtors are always asking, how does the appraiser choose the comps? We know how we do a CMA, competitive or comparative market analysis, as they're often conflated. But we know that that's not an appraisal because we don't do adjustments. We also choose a little differently. Realtors choose comps differently than appraisers do quite often. I always say in my talks, you guys call them comps, we just call them sales. Let the appraiser determine whether or not they're actually comps. Send me your sales and I'll determine if they are comparable or not. But you could talk about the scientific process you go through. That's a benefit to them. The 5 filter test. I call it the SALTS, S-A-L-T-S. S-A-L-T-S. Write that down. The SALTS 5 filter test utilized to determine the best comps. Size, appeal, location, time, and the principle of substitution. Talk about it in almost every talk. When they say, how do you choose comps? I go, I use the SALTS method. Size, appeal, location, time, and substitution. What's substitution? Oh, thank you for asking. If this home was on the market today, would your buyer buy it instead? It's the principle of substitution. I go on to explain in common language, their language, what the principle of substitution is. And then I use examples. You have X dollars available to you. You can buy this or you can buy this. That's the principle of substitution. So with a comp, if this particular home was on the market today, would your buyer buy it instead? They like that explanation. Let's go on to another one. Accurate reporting of market conditions. It's expected, right? Nobody expects you to report inaccurate market conditions, but we think, well, that makes us a good appraiser. No, it makes you an appraiser who's doing what's expected. But let's turn that feature into a benefit. The benefit, your scientific approach to determining date of sale adjustments, so that that particular comp gets what it needs and deserves in terms of an adjustment. And the only way to know that is to accurately assess the market conditions. What's another benefit of accurate reporting of market conditions? Again, it's sales through underwriting. Underwriters love it. What's another benefit? Close on time. Again, there that comes up. Speed is an important aspect today, folks. Hammer that one home. Make sure appraisal's bulletproof. When you have accurate reporting of market conditions, a good explanation, or summarizing the market conditions, which also support your conclusions quite often. So the benefits to them being you use a scientific approach to determine the date of sale adjustments so that that particular comp gets what it needs and deserves. It's sales through underwriting. It's bulletproof. And you get to close the deal on time. Cool. You've just turned accurate reporting of market conditions into a whole basket of benefits for your client. How about regression analysis? I hear this all the time from appraisers who think they're better than everybody else, which they may be. The graphers, the statters, the scatter plotters, which I appreciate and enjoy. I have an understanding of how that stuff adds color to the value conclusions and the rationale. But quite often that engineer mind, the one who's really good at that, is not very good at explaining the benefits. They're good at explaining the whys and the data, but they usually speak from a data standpoint. And it can be tough to understand. I know appraisers who don't understand it. It took me a while to understand it at a basic level. And I know clients really don't care about it and don't understand it because they don't have to use it daily. So it's our job to make the invisible visible, meaning we need to take that information and turn it into something for them, turn it into something that's valuable for them. So of course, you first have to break it down into understandable terms, speak their language, and explain it first. What is it? But then you can go on to talk about the benefits of doing regression. Makes the appraisal bulletproof. Does it? Well, it certainly helps. Gives you more support. Underwriters love them. It's one of the benefits you can explain to them. The loan officer may not know that, but if they converse with their underwriters and the underwriters go, this appraiser puts all this data in here and we really love it because we never have to call and ask them, how did you derive this adjustment, or how did you derive this assessment of market? And you can go, well, I did a regression analysis. This is the data I used. Here are the results. Here's my interpretation of the results. You can explain a benefit is that it's a very scientific method for determining the absolute most appropriate ranges of adjustments for your buyers. Now, again, some of you might be listening and you might be the scatter plotter, the grapher, and you might go, no, Blaine, that's not what a regression analysis is, to which I would say, I'm talking to people who don't care necessarily about what they are, and I'm selling them on a basic understanding of what they are and how they can help them. So they go, oh, I'm not trying to teach somebody how to do a regression analysis. I'm trying to teach people why we would do them and why they add value to the process for my clients, for my realtors, for my lawyers, for my lenders, for my underwriters. We're turning features and processes into benefits for them. So we can explain it's a very scientific method for determining the absolute most appropriate adjustment ranges for your buyer's home so that they understand the market value of particular features. We're turning a thing or a process we do, sometimes a confusing process, into a what's in it for them, what's in it for me, as the client process. And so on and so forth, this whole exercise goes. You can do this you could take hours and hours and hours, days to do this. And I recommend that you do. You take the little things that go into an appraisal that we likely take for granted. Those are the invisible things. And it becomes an exercise for me or you or anybody who does this to find silly little things in the appraisal that we typically never think about or talk about. It could be something in our certification, could be something in our additional comments. For example, per use PAP. We're all supposed to have a full summary of highest and best use somewhere in the report, an explanation and a summary. The 4 tests of whether or not something is highest and best use. And underwriters typically don't even catch it. Some do. But when one does, it's an immediate revision request and 24 to 48 hour delay. It slows down the whole train of paperwork by at least a day or two. So by having a full summary of highest and best use in every report, I am guaranteeing that our reports will never be flagged for that one silly issue, for not having the summary, thus never slowing down their processes for that silly reason. Those of you doing lender work, you know that there's a little box that says, does the subject meet highest and best use, or is it the highest and best use of the property? And we check the box. I do appraisal reviews like many of you do. Quite often, that's the only reference to highest and best use in the report. And again, it may not be one of your main selling points. I wouldn't recommend going out and giving talks that you summarize highest and best use and you go beyond just checking boxes. I wouldn't recommend when you're giving a talk or a training session to a group of lenders, but you have it in your bag. You have it as a tool. And the professional with the most tools, the sharpest set of tools, and the most variety of tools can build the best house. You have it in your bag, and if you ever want to point it out, you can say, well, here's something silly, but it's something that we do that you may not know about that a lot of appraisers don't do. And here's what it means to you, and here's how it doesn't slow down the process and all that. You've taken something that is expected and required, and instead of blowing it off simply because it's required, you turn it into a benefit for them. You make the invisible visible for your clients. And you're teaching them something in the process. This is really important. You're setting yourself apart as one of the preeminent appraisers in your market. I've said it before. You're either adding or you're taking away from the market. We're all a commodity to a large degree. You have to figure out ways to set yourself apart in the market, and this is one of the ways. So that's the features and benefits example of how to add value to the process. So taking what are considered features, what is expected, commodities, if you will, inside the appraisal and of the process, and turning them into benefits for your clients. You have to turn on that creative portion of your brain to do that. How about learning the whole process? I'm not referring to the appraisal process. I'm talking about the whole process from start to closing of a real estate deal. I speak with appraisers all the time who have almost no clue about what goes on in the mortgage loan process. The very process that birthed the need for an appraisal that landed in their inbox. The order you got was birthed as a result of a loan and a sale process. So I highly recommend researching the complete loan process from start to finish if you don't already know it. I know it, of course, because I was in the lending business and I was in the real estate business, so I understand the full circle and who all's involved in the processes and who's doing what at what part of the process. You can, of course, Google the whole process, but I'd also recommend calling up one of your local lenders. Now, I'm also going to recommend you call up one of your local lenders that you don't get business from, but that you may want to get business from. Maybe it's somebody you've been trying to get business from and you just haven't gotten it yet. And ask to take them to coffee. Or better yet, I recommend this all the time to appraisers, ask if you can bring in their whole office some lunch. And I can tell you from past experience that both realtors and lender offices love Qdoba and Chipotle and those type of things, taco bars. And for about $150 or less, you can have them cater. They make it all up for you. They give you the little sterno things to keep it heated, and they give you the little trays to put all the meat in and the tortillas and everything else, and you bring that to an office, they're in love. So you either take them to coffee, take somebody to coffee, or you offer to cater lunch, not to teach. You can if you have that rapport already and they ask you to, I have that rapport in my market, so quite often they call me and say, hey, will you put on an hour class? Of course I will. But I'm saying if you don't have that rapport yet or recognition in the market, you say, I'll bring you and cater lunch, but I would like to pick your brain and all the people in your office's brains for 30 minutes. You typically say 20 to 30 minutes. You definitely want to put a time frame on it. It will most likely go longer than that, especially if food is involved. But you always want to put what's called a time constraint on it, so they know that if it's not going well and they don't like you, they only have to put up with you for 20 or 30 minutes, and then they can back out of it, and they can go, okay, we got to get going. We got money to make. So you put a time constraint. It can be a false time constraint, but put a time constraint on it. Say, look, I only need 30 minutes of your time. I'd like to grill you on the loan process so that I can be better. I would like to, maybe grill isn't the best word. I would like to pick your brains on the loan process so that I can be a better appraiser in my market. Tell them you'd like to learn all the ins and outs about the loan process because you want to be the expert in your field. Can you imagine how that sounds to a lender? Can you imagine how that sounds to a real estate office? When an appraiser says, I would love to pick your brain on everything you do because I want to have an understanding of the whole business. You have just set yourself apart as the preeminent provider. You've decommoditized. I don't even know if that's a word. If it isn't, it should be. You've decommoditized the process. And again, having been a lender and also a realtor, I have a good understanding of that process and all the variables and the processes that go on behind the scenes. Once a mortgage application's been taken, or once a real estate listing agreement's been taken, and I regularly point this out when I give talks because that's a strong point that I have, and it almost instantly grants me some authority as well as some credibility with the group I'm speaking with. I usually make a joke when I'm giving talks to realtors and lenders because I'll say, it's okay, we've put a piece of paper in front of you so you can ball it up and throw it at me because we know there's animosity towards appraisers. I'm okay with that. Get it out now. But then when I go on to explain that, look, I was a realtor for many years and I was a lender as well before I became an appraiser, so I understand the whole process and I speak all the languages of the transaction, you see shoulders drop, you see people sigh, and they go, oh, he at least was one of us. And then, of course, as I get into the talk, they understand I'm one of you too. Consider myself a strategic partner and one of the spokes in the whole wheel of the transaction. Many appraisers don't understand this language. I recommend you adopt it. I also think that many appraisers that are going to start coming into the business, especially now that some of the requirements have changed, younger crowd potentially will have this language, especially if they're listening to people like me and some of the other coaches that are out there. So I use, again, the phrase that having had those prior careers in lending and real estate, and you don't need to have had those careers. I just say that. You can just simply say, listen, I've talked with many realtors and lenders, and so I have a good understanding of the process. Helps me to be more empathetic for you. By the way, I don't say that I'm sympathetic. Never use the word sympathy. I don't say I'm sympathetic and therefore I hit your number because I know you have kids to feed. I simply say I can speak your language and I know what's going on behind the scenes. I know your pain points. I know your struggles. I know your frustrations. So if we have to have a discussion at some point in the process, I can bring some empathy and I understand how to frame the conversation from their point of view and using their language. This is super important. As I mentioned, there's a huge difference between empathy and sympathy. By the way, empathy, being empathic, which connotes feeling, is, for example, seeing your friend fall through the ice on a pond and having the compassion and the calm, the wherewithal to throw them a rope or break off a tree branch and stand on the bank and offer them a tree branch to save their life. Sympathy is jumping in the pond with them without first grabbing the rope or the branch. One of those things is helpful. You see the problem and you go, okay, well, I'm not going to die too. It's kind of like when you're on an airplane and they say, in the event of an emergency, oxygen will drop out. Put your own mask on first. Because if you're freaking out or you're running out of oxygen, you can't help anybody else. That's empathy. Being sympathetic that the person next to you on the airplane is starving for air, but doing nothing about it for yourself, sympathetic. One of them is helpful, one of them is not. So know the whole loan process. Add more empathy to the transaction. Learn the languages of all parties involved. Of course, we have to remain objective and unbiased, and neither of those words connote disinterest in the transaction. I can be an objective third-party, unbiased reviewer of a transaction, but I can still be empathetic, and I can still be interested in the transaction. You can remain objective and unbiased and still be able to emote, put out energy. You can emote empathy when talking with the buyer or the selling agent when an appraisal value is not coming in where they'd like it, especially. I have these conversations almost every week, by the way, not because all of the reports are coming in under value, but I quite often have them with realtors who maybe had a different appraiser out on a deal. And sometimes they call and they want me to explain to them because, again, they know me and I've put myself out there as a resource for them. They will call me and say, hey, we just had this done. We had this appraisal done. And here's our concern. And can you explain it to me? Can you take a look at this? Can you whatever? Now, forget about ethics. Forget about whether or not that's kosher. Being the resource in the market, I always offer myself up for that. And quite often, I will review other appraisals. And quite often, I will fall on the side of the appraiser. Even if I disagree with some things in the report, very rarely will I say, oh, this is a shitty appraisal. Quite often, I'll look at it and I'll go, listen, I think they did everything they needed to do. I think they pulled good comps. I may have pulled different comps, but I see what they had available to them in the market, and I think you'd be barking up the wrong tree to try to dispute this. I think you'd be wasting time. I think your time is better spent doing a sales job, sitting down with the seller and saying, hey, look, this is a good appraisal. We've had somebody else review it. Same thing's going to happen, and it's going to put us back a month. So what do you say we try to come to some understanding? I have these conversations every week. And again, we don't have substantive conversations on my own reports about specifics of the report or the value conclusion, but we have very substantive communications about the market, the neighborhood, the comps available, how I did my search, adjustments, features, benefits, overpaying on deals, things they may not know about the neighborhood or the market where I have an overview or more experience in the market, sales data, market data, bracketing, Fannie Mae requirements. Usually that's a big one. They don't understand the requirements that are placed upon us, HUD guidelines, underwriter requirements, etc. They think we just arbitrarily come up with value and then killed that deal. No, we don't do that. Some do. Very rare in this business now. I take a lot of time, and I modulate my tone, by the way, to convey both empathy and authority at the same time. It takes practice, but it can be done. And one of the first lines or angles that I always take when I get on a phone was, it doesn't matter if they call up hostile and just start dropping F-bombs right off the bat. I always am willing to take those calls and I listen because I know the value of letting them get that out. And then I know if I do my job, I'll start to ask questions and find out what the real problem is, which is usually different than what they say it is. But I always start out modulating my tone, my attitude, by saying, listen, man, or Joan, I totally get where you're coming from on this one, and I'm on your side. I almost always say that. It's almost always my first line. Or I say this, I am right there with you. I totally get it. But here's the deal. And then I go into explaining comps, market, underwriter, Fannie, all that stuff. Gross adjustments, net adjustments, bracketing, all these different things that they don't understand. Haven't had one conversation yet in 18 years of doing this that an agent didn't leave, no matter how hostile they may have called, or a loan officer, that didn't leave with a big thank you for at least taking the time to explain everything. And I've been on calls for 45 minutes before. Usually those are the ones that start out hostile and then we work down. It's called conflict resolution. We work down to the point where they have gotten it all out. They've released it all. They have nothing left. And then you start explaining. Their mind is open and they go, I get it. I've had them call back before and say, listen, I want to really apologize for my behavior and my language. And I go, no, I get it. I totally get it. I'm okay with that. I know it. You're upset. I get it. I mean, their income is on the line on these deals. And quite often they have had that money spent before the deal closes. But I haven't had one conversation in 18 years that the agent didn't thank me at the end of it for at least taking the time. Quite often they say, thank you so much for explaining that. I have a better understanding. Sometimes they're still pissed. They may not have hung up the phone happy, but they hung up appreciative of the conversation, the education, and the mirroring, the pacing, the tone, the empathy. When you can say to them, listen, I totally get it. I worked in a big office with a lot of appraisers. I ran a company with a lot of appraisers. And I could sit from my office and listen. Well, I started out in a cubicle and I ended up in an office. I could hear in both situations appraisers talking to realtors, lenders, and homeowners. They should not be talking to human beings the way they would no empathy whatsoever. I recommend you develop some if you don't have it now. So I mentioned understanding all the languages of the transaction, and I'll tell you how this has been very valuable for me. Since, again, I was a lender and I was a realtor, having knowledge of the whole transaction, the pain points of everybody involved, and the language and the words all of them use, I actually, as I've kind of just explained, I do some coaching on the phone if I get a sense that the agent is say, newer or desperate or panicking, potentially due to low value. And by the way, it's happening a lot in my market currently because things are selling for way more than list price, and there's very low inventory in our market like there are in many markets. So it's not uncommon for me to give them some tips regarding salesmanship. And I don't necessarily recommend this to anybody but the absolute best articulators and most confident in our profession, or those of you who have been or are. I know some appraisers are currently realtors as well as appraisers, and you probably speak that language very well. But I don't recommend this to every appraiser. But I will say something like, listen, Jim or Joan or Fred or Fanny, you've likely been here before and will be here again. I'm referring to low value. And this is why you make so much more than appraisers do. There's a lot on the line here. I get it. And this is the point in the transaction when you sit down with the selling agent or the buying agent and you talk about what you and I just discussed. I just explained everything to you, how the process that I had to go through. And hopefully you've taken some notes. And if not, I'm happy, more than happy to go over it again with you. And I'll give you the language that you can use with the selling agent or the buying agent. You're free to use my words. You're also free to use me as the scapegoat if needed. Blame it all on me. I'm used to that. I got big shoulders and I can handle it. But you can keep this deal together. I have confidence. I see it happen every week. You can keep it together by explaining all of this to the other party in much the same way that you and I just discussed this. See, I'm saying to them, I just coached you without coaching you on how to have empathy. You called me pissed. You called me for understanding. I had empathy for you. And I explained, listen, I'm right there with you, man. I totally get it. Here's the parameters that our appraisers have to follow. Here's the requirements that are on our shoulders. And then once they have some understanding, then they go, oh gosh, I didn't know all that stuff. I appreciate you explaining that. So you've actually coached and educated them without them even knowing it. So you're saying, you've been here before, you've had low deals before, and you're going to be here again. So let's walk through this together. You can keep this deal together by having this very conversation with the seller or the buyer, depending on who you're talking to. I'll give you the words to use. Let's write it down. Here's what's going on in the market. Here's what's going on with the comps. Another appraiser is going to have the same comps available to them. Some at this point think the easy thing to do, I say this to realtors quite often, some of you at this point think the easy thing to do is just to get another appraisal. Or even a new lender, which does happen. But you're likely going to run into the same issue, and it's going to happen a month from now, after all the delays of taking that route. Since all of us appraisers, all the realtors have access to the same comps, the same information, and we all have to follow the same requirements. Just because you order a new appraisal from another appraiser doesn't mean they don't have to follow Fannie, Freddie, HUD, FHA, USPAP, underwriting requirements. We all have to follow the same requirements to some degree. It doesn't mean another appraiser won't see things differently than I do. There is some subjectivity to appraising, but there's absolutely also no guarantee that an underwriter is going to buy that other appraiser's report. Now, as an aside, let's step back. I'm talking to you again now, my listeners. When we talk like that to the realtors or to the lenders, what I have just conveyed to them subconsciously, because I already took the time, maybe 45 minutes to explain everything, I have subconsciously conveyed quality and the belief and understanding in them that my report is probably the best report they're going to get. They may not potentially get that with another appraiser because they haven't talked to that. They don't even know who that other appraiser is going to be if they go with another appraisal or another lender. But because I took the time, it has subconsciously conveyed quality. I've been able to explain and articulate my process, turning features into benefits. So now I'm talking to them again. This doesn't mean that another appraiser is not going to see things differently than I do, but there's absolutely no guarantee that an underwriter is going to buy that other appraisal report over mine. It could trigger a whole set of red flags and revision requests. Now you have two different lenders, potentially, two different appraisals, potentially, a pissed off buyer, a pissed off seller, and a 30-day delay, a 30-day gap. Maybe it's only a 3-week gap. Either way, it's a gap. And the market is always changing. You likely have a dead deal. Wouldn't it be much easier to do some selling and sell the other parties on why this deal makes sense? And when we, again, stepping back, when we use language like that, most of them at that point will go, yeah, you're right. Let me see what I can do. And again, they always end up agreeing at the end of the conversation. They always end up agreeing with me. They don't always leave happy, but they always leave and saying, thank you for taking the time to explain it. You're right. And of course, I don't always know how the deal ends up. Maybe they hang up and they try to get another appraisal. I know that has happened. Maybe they hang up and the deal dies. That's happened. What I do know is that the conversation added value to the process for the parties that at least I was speaking to in that example. And it added some value to the parties who had no idea the conversation was even taking place. They don't know it, but it added some value. If a buyer's agent can keep a deal together, then it added value for the selling party as well. They may not have gotten what they may have had to lower their sales price to my appraisal value, which happens. But it added value whether they know it or not, because there could have been delays. They could have had another appraisal. Now it's 30 days down the line and there's 2 or 3 buyers that have been involved in different appraisals and different lenders, and they're like, what the hell's going on? I don't expect thank you cards from all these people, but I'm expecting you to understand the value you've added to the process. Of course, I do see a lot of these deals come back across my desk with a revision request to change the sale price down to the appraised value, which tells me that somebody did their job. And I see those as huge wins. Of course, they never get mentioned on Facebook when the lender's posting pictures of their closing party and giving their clients cakes and things like that. Usually they're thanking the realtor partner who referred the business to them and the title agency and everybody else in the transaction, and you almost never see, hey, and thanks to Blaine over at Real Value Group for keeping this deal together. Now, I know there's reasons why they don't do that, because they don't want to suggest collusion or that we somehow had substantive communication on price or value. I get it. But I guarantee we save more deals than they do, for sure. Nobody sends me a cake. Nobody sends me a thank you card. Nobody gives us the shout out on social media for keeping the whole thing together, but that's okay. We've gone above and beyond and we've added value to the process, and it pays off in spades in new business. That's what I care about. It pays off in spades in new relationships, referrals, endorsements of you and your work to their colleagues, etc. Especially if you've put yourself out there as the resource in that regard, and you have realtors calling you all the time just asking questions. You don't have to think in terms of dollars per hour. You don't have to think, well, if I talk to you for half an hour, I got to bill you $50. No. Just know it's going to turn into $300, $800, $1,000, $50,000 down the line. It's called lifetime value of a client. When you can work like that, you can still maintain your ethics and appraiser independence. You've helped to dispel the myth that appraisers have too much subjective control over the transaction. We've heard that before. Appraisers have too much control over the market. They can just kill deals whenever they want. I say this too in almost all the talks that I give, that quite often the perception from realtors or lenders about appraisers is that we work in dark, dank, wet offices in the basement somewhere, and we wake up and eat small pets for breakfast, and we just go, okay, I can't wait to kill a deal today. Now, I've had realtors say in those, when I'm joking, I'm being facetious, I have realtors who say, yes, some do. That means to me they have run into appraisers who they think eat small pets for breakfast and just wake up to kill a deal. I haven't personally met or think I've met appraisers like that, but I guess I believe they're out there. If you're one of them, a diet change is in order. Some sunshine, maybe. But when we can speak like this and we can do this and add value to the market, we've helped dispel that myth that we have too much subjective control over the transaction, or that appraisers don't give a shit. We do. We may not give a shit about the same things you do as the realtor or the lender, but I hope as appraisers, you do give a shit to some degree about the transaction, at least having empathy enough to be able to articulate it and explain it. And I think that elevates the profession. A rising tide raises all boats, or ships, as the saying goes. And when appraisers often are fond of saying that appraising is part art, part science, they should also include part sales. They almost always leave this out. Since we're always selling our work to a variety of people in the value chain, we're always selling our work to the realtors, to the lenders, to the attorneys, to the estate planners, to the underwriters, to the reviewers of our work. We're doing sales. We just don't think of it in terms of sales. Some of you got into the business because you weren't good at it or you didn't like sales. But I'm telling you, you are always selling. And the better you get at it, the more value you bring to the value chain, the more value you bring to your market, and the more value you add to the appraisal process. Now, the last thing that I strongly recommend when we talk about adding value to the process is community outreach. I talked about it earlier. I've talked extensively about speaking and training and doing courses. And by community outreach, what I mean is giving talks, workshops, training courses, doing videos, blogs, podcasts, or whatever method fits with your personality. And this podcast is one of the ways that I like to think I'm adding value not only to my market, but to my industry. I like to believe that I may be helping my fellow real estate professionals, brothers and sisters in appraising and selling of real estate and loaning money on real estate. And I like to think that I'm helping my fellow superstars, my fellow real estate professionals, give some thought to these topics and possibly be better for having done so. I have to believe that or I wouldn't do this. I don't make any money doing this. It takes time. So one of the ways that we can fulfill this community outreach component that I'm expressing is by giving talks and workshops to realtors, lenders, homeowners on a variety of related topics. I recommend it, by the way, to realtors. I recommend it to my lender clients. Put together talks, workshops, training courses. Do Con Ed. I just got my first couple courses approved for Con Ed, and I have 10 more in the process to be approved for Con Ed. Once you learn the process of getting that done, it's fairly straightforward and simple. And if you're good at developing content and training courses like I am, you can get your courses approved for 1, 2, 4, 8, 36 hours of Con Ed, whatever it might be. And now you're in front of realtors, potentially getting paid. I didn't do it to get paid. I do it because I want to be the authority in the field, in my market, and I also want to help realtors get their Con Ed credits that they need for their license and learn about the appraisal process. Who better to do that than me? That's what I believe. So it's one of the ways that I like to think I'm adding value to my industry and to the process. So we give talks to and workshops to realtors, to lenders, to homeowners, to attorneys, estate planners, anybody who could use any of our services. And I've talked before how this has had tremendous it's had a tremendous business multiplying effect and helped us develop a name in our community. And I can't recommend it enough as a way to add value to the process. It's a value add for your clients who ask you to come to speak and teach. It's a value add for the participants. And by the way, if I didn't say it, I'll say it again. I don't get paid when realtors or lenders ask me to put on a 2-hour workshop. I don't get paid. I don't even eat lunch when they're offering at a restaurant. Just me personally. I don't want to have ranch dressing dripping down my shirt and I spill everywhere I go. So I choose not to. I recommend you not either. If they're drinking beer, I've given talks at some of the bigger microbreweries around here. I don't drink the beer, and it's delicious, but I don't partake. But it's a value add when you do that for everybody in the value chain, which is all the people and the participants will come in contact with you or with your product, and they leave having new information and new views to share on the topics that you spoke on. You've educated them. And again, I get the fear of public speaking thing. It's the biggest fear of most people on earth. Not everybody's cut out for it. Not everybody will do it. Some people are just downright bad at it. We've all sat in meetings and workshops with those kind of people. Nobody's ever gotten better, however, by not doing something. You have to start somewhere, and I guarantee it's my solemn promise to you, my friends, you will get better the more you do it. I honestly don't really know if I'm any good at it myself, but I have lots of experience doing it, having owned a large martial arts business and being fortunate enough to travel around the world teaching to thousands of people for almost 20 years has helped me work out some of the bugs in my process, my speaking process. It's helped me to eliminate a lot of fears and develop a better process for scripting and doing research, getting rid of the ahs and the ums, which I still sometimes say. But I am quite sure, however, that I was horrible at it when I first started. I also know that I'm still in development, and I'm constantly working on it 25 plus years later. The process can't start, though, until you do. So I'm here to encourage you to get started, and I'm willing to help. You have questions about how I put those courses together, how I develop content, or how speaking. You can join Toastmasters. I strongly recommend doing that. That helps tremendously. You're in a room, small group of people learning how to speak, and they're very empathetic to the process. Nobody's going to tease you or laugh at you. But the process can't start until you do. And you can do this by simply taking 1 or 2 realtors for coffee. I've recommended this before. I've given talks to small real estate and lending offices with 3 to 5 people. I got asked to do a 2-hour, almost like a panel, first-time homebuyer seminar. There were 5 speakers there, a title person, an insurance guy, myself, the realtor, the lender. And there were 2 people who showed up. This was supposed to have 40 people at it. 2 people showed up. But we give our talks and we move on. For those of you who have fear of public speaking, a 2-person audience is perfect. It's like you're speaking to friends. So I've given talks to 3 to 5 person real estate offices. I've given talks to 10 or 20 person offices. I've done workshops with 40 or 50, and I've given talks to groups of hundreds in an auditorium at the local association of realtors. The size of the group is up to you to some extent. Nobody says you've got to speak to that large of a group. But you're going to find if you start on this journey that speaking to a group of 300 is very similar to speaking to a group of 30 or a group of 3. It's one of the key points of public speaking that you learn, because you're really only speaking, A, to those who are there for what you have to offer, those who want to listen to what you have to say, and B, in a bigger group, it's usually the people in the front row. You have to learn, of course, how to extend your voice and your tone and your energy to the back of the room or to the balcony or wherever you're speaking. You have to learn how to fill a bigger room with your energy and your tone and your voice and your volume and modulation and all those kind of things. But those come down the line. You're usually making eye contact with 1 or 2 people in the front row, and you talk to them directly for a little bit, and then you move down the line and you talk to them, And then you move a couple rows back and you make a point to them. And if somebody asks a question, you look at them. You hear the question and you say, great question. Did everybody hear it? No, let me repeat it. And then you repeat the question to the audience. You give them kudos for having the guts to ask the question. Many people are afraid to ask questions in a crowd. But those are all things you'll learn. But you'll only learn them once you start. When you're able to compartmentalize and focus on a few people in the audience and not constantly be focusing on, oh my God, I'm speaking to 100 people, you become much better at it and your message becomes much more clear. You're able to deliver your message in a personal way, yet still be engaging and educating the whole group. Start small, work up. That is it, my friends. I hope you've enjoyed this one, but more importantly, I'm hoping you've gotten some value from it. I hope that I have added some value to your day for this hour plus that we've spent together. And of course, I want to reiterate, if you'd like to stay updated whenever a new episode drops, please head over to the realvaluecast.com or realvaluegroup.com website and send us your best email address. Make sure you whitelist once you get it from us. And you will see over on the right-hand side on the Real Value Cast website or on the Real Value Group website, it's down towards the bottom, a small box. And all we're asking for, we don't want your children's names and your social security numbers and credit card numbers. All we want is a name. You can make it up. I don't even care. And your best email address. And we will email you the podcast. We will also email bonuses when we record those. Bonuses that the people who are listening only on iTunes, Sketcher, and Libsyn will not get. If you join the Real Value Cast tribe, or the Real Value tribe as we like to call it, we send them directly to your email address every week so that you also don't have to go searching for it. Feel free to share it, by the way, on social media. If you like anything that we've said, of course, you can comment on social media. We love that. Let's see. We'll never sell. This is important. I made myself a note. We're never, of course, going to sell your email or anything other than we'll never send you anything other than the Real Value Podcast info. And we look forward to talking to you again on the next one. Thank you again, my friends. My name is Blaine Feyen. I am the host for this and every episode of the Real Value Podcast. Please feel free to email me if you ever have questions. Post on social media. You can follow me, you can friend me on Facebook. Just search for Blaine Feyen, F as in Frank, E-Y-E-N. You can follow my website on Facebook, which is Real Value Group. And you can follow me also on Instagram, which is Real Value King. You can also just look up my name, Blaine Feyen, and follow me on Instagram, where we post updates there as well. I look forward to chatting with you the next time. I am out.